PhD in ISS, the Netherlands. So yeah, we would like to hear more about your updates, Mbak Yuyun, and please feel free, I guess, about the structure. Maybe Mbak Yuyun, perhaps you would like to share your update first, and after that we will have question and answer after that. Is that okay? Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you, and please, Mbak Yuyun, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. So let's start the discussion. I have so many slides, but I will just keep some for further discussion if needed. But if you would like to quote or cite the information in slides, welcome. You can mention my name as the reference. All right, so can we have the slides? This is about the norms and the norms of human rights and the role of the AICHR. Yeah. So we just finished our 36 meeting, AICHR 36 meeting in ASEAN Secretariat from 27 of February until the 3rd of March. We had included in the discussion, the meeting, the country visit to Bogor, 1 hour from Jakarta to understand, to help AICHR to understand human rights problem and human rights situation and the response from the city government to the issue of human rights in Bogor. So I will also include that into my discussion. While waiting, you can also open the website of AICHR, www.aichr.org or ASEAN.org. Okay, so this is the presentation, Understanding ASEAN's Human Rights Regime and the Role of AICHR. Next slide. This is PDF, so you have to move it. Okay. So I would like to start first by looking at what we have in the region, in the world. There are a number of regional associations, organizations, as well as the mechanisms. So in Asia Pacific, for instance, we have West Asia or Middle East sub-region. We have also Central Asia. We have South Asia, and we have Southeast Asia. We have East Asia. We have the Pacific region. So these are some of the sub-regions in our region called Asia Pacific. In Middle East, there is one sub-regional association called League of Arab States. But I am not informed about this, how often they meet, or what kind of discussion they have been explored. I do not know. Maybe can Google further. In Central Asia, there is no sub-regional or association. While in South Asia, there is South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, or SARC. In Southeast Asia, there is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, in which I will be able to discuss further on this. There are two human rights bodies, AICHR, or ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, and ACWC. In East Asia, which include China, South Korea, Japan, Mongolia, they don't have a sub-regional association. And in the Pacific, there is a Pacific Island Forum. So we have sub-region, in this region we have number of sub-regions which have regional organization and do not have regional organization, and some regional organizations have human rights mechanism. Only ASEAN has regional human rights mechanism. The rest of the sub-region, they don't have the mechanism of human rights at the moment. So the idea about coming up with a regional human rights mechanism was actually mentioned in VDPA, or Vienna Declaration and Plan of Action, looking at how universal human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be penetrated, can be generated to all countries in the world. One way to do it is through, one way to universalizing human rights is through region. But in the case of Asia Pacific region, it become very difficult because we are very diverse from one to another in terms of issues, in terms of regime, in terms of location, geographical location. We have also a different level of political stability, too wide and lack of uniting tradition, the absence of high-level mutual understanding between governments. So in 1998 or 1997, there was an agreement among the UN members as well as the countries in Asia Pacific, let's go sub-region. And at the same time, in that moment, Southeast Asian nation, ASEAN, come up with number of efforts to develop as AICHR or ASEAN Human Rights Body in that time, and now it is established. So based on that decision, we go individually. Next slide. So this is a common features of regional human rights mechanism as we collect now from Africa, from Americas, and from Europe. It is complementary to national and international system. It is a place in which, or it is the venue or space in which normative framework can be established, can be developed, and can be circulated. And then regional human rights mechanism supposed to be independent, impartial and consist of impartial experts, and should be competent and full-time secretariat support to carry out the mandates and establish the interaction between the Commission, civil society, and also national human institutions. Can do both promotion and protection at the same time, cooperation with international human rights system. So the scope, the level, the coverage of the mandate very different from one to another. Each region has its own way. It has its own time and pace to develop its own system. But this is a common features from all existing regional human rights mechanisms. Next. In ASEAN, human rights come into or develop under the ASEAN community. ASEAN community is divided into ASEAN political security, ASEAN economic community, ASEAN social cultural community. As you know, ASEAN was created by 5 countries or established by 5 countries. Anyone want to guess which one of the countries established ASEAN in 1967? Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, yes. So you see here 10, only 5 of them established ASEAN in 1967. The rest come a little bit later. Can you guess which country joined ASEAN the latest? Not yet. Timor-Leste is not yet a member of ASEAN, it's observer. Among these 10, which country that joined ASEAN the latest? Cambodia. Why? Because Cambodia in that time still in civil war. So Cambodia need to fix, need to deal with the problem first, and then join ASEAN later. So after after 5, and the first of the rest of the countries joining ASEAN is actually Brunei Darussalam. Immediately after English, what is this in English one? After British left Brunei Darussalam, a day after, Brunei submit the letter asking to join ASEAN. And then after that, Malaysia, after that, Laos, Vietnam, and one more country, Laos and Vietnam join, and then Laos, and then Myanmar and Laos, and then after that, Cambodia. Cambodia is the latest joining ASEAN. Vietnam is not yet, because Timor-Leste is not yet. This is only 10, so Timor-Leste is going to be the 11th member of ASEAN. So in terms of human rights, each country, these 10 countries, have a different ideas, have different perspective, perception about human rights. Some countries believe that human rights is used by powerful countries to impose something or impose their own norms, policies, approaches to ASEAN. So for many countries, human rights has been used as a tool to neocolonialism. Other countries felt that this is a symbol of openness. If we adopt human rights as a value, this is a new ASEAN. This is a symbol of openness of ASEAN, especially after 1997, after financial crisis. So you can see not only human rights, the fact that human rights by definition is inherent in our life as human, but politically it has been seen as a tool in relation between states. So you can see it's very different from one to another. There is no consensus on how member states look at human rights. Next. But by the inclusion of human rights in ASEAN regionalism means a lot. It facilitates the regional space to discuss about human rights. Before the inclusion of human rights to ASEAN, no one talk about human rights, unless human rights has been seen as the tool of powerful countries. You can see the joint statement of foreign ministers in 1991, 1992, and 1993 mention a lot about this. But now, we still continue to talk about this is a tool or the tool used by powerful countries, but we can talk about other dimension of human rights, which is it is inherent to individual. We can talk about highlighting about the victims' rights and others. So our discussion nowadays by the inclusion of human rights in ASEAN regionalism varied, diverse, and widen. And it is going to, it is still in the process. And it also creates a regional process. Now with the creation of AICHR, for instance, each member state has to be a chair of AICHR. You like it or not. When your country become a chair, your country also become the chair of human rights in this AICHR. So you like it or not, you have to talk about human rights. And there are processes because of the inclusion of human rights into the ASEAN. Human rights also included in the ASEAN Charter, which means all documents created after the Charter or adopted after the Charter has to mention human rights. So this is how human rights can be included in the process of regionalism. Maybe it is not always a smooth process happen because this is new, but countries try to work it out. And it also creates interaction between one country to another. Before, there was no relations between one country to another under ASEAN. in relation to human rights, but now they are, and they can, and they have to. Relationship, cooperation, created because of the inclusion of human rights in the Charter. AICHR become the important regional platform in which norms, practices, approaches on human rights can be discussed. And then dialogue as well, using this AICHR as a platform. In AICHR now, there are a number of human rights strategies as reflected in the developing plan of action, cross-pillar working, so economic community, social, cultural, and political security. They have to talk about human rights to each other. And also cooperation on human rights with dialogue partners. We have cooperation with the EU on human rights, with Australia, with United States, with different countries, dialogue partners of ASEAN. So, but we need to also understand that ASEAN member states are the creator of AICHR. They are in control what can be said and cannot be said. But this is not something written down on the stone. It continues to evolve from time to time. It is very important to continue to talk about human rights in ASEAN. So the feeling of awkwardness, the feeling of not comfortable talking about certain issues gradually can be normalized. Next. Now, before going further to ASEAN, let's look at the member states. We talk about member state as the creator or the controller or the master of human rights cooperation and bodies in ASEAN. So let's look at modalities in ASEAN member states. This is 10 ASEAN member states. All countries have constitutions that include human rights in it, or the guarantee of human rights, except Brunei. Brunei has no mention specifically that individual or group have human rights, but they said all can believe on religion, but the religion of the state is Islam. But that is not necessarily a human rights. Yeah? But only Brunei has no comprehensive mention about human rights or provision about human rights in their constitution. But all member states guarantee human rights of individual. The content may be different from one country to another. The Philippines constitution, for instance, include the right of migrant workers, which the rest of the countries member of ASEAN do not mention it. Lao constitution has include freedom of religion and belief, and for those who believe and those who do not believe. Yeah, so atheists has also protected. In Thailand, talk a lot about the protection for pregnant women, single mother, and so on and so forth. So each country has different characteristic, but all of them, 9 of them, guarantee human rights. Next slide. And look at the mechanism at the national level. Among 10 countries, 5 out of 10 have national human institutions with different year when they were established and different powers. So we can see here different powers belong to national human institution in all 5 national human institutions. Some countries or some national human institutions, for instance, almost all human rights institutions have power to receive complaints, doing investigation, but not all national human institutions can call witness, only some of them. Yeah, so you can see some of the statistics here. Cambodia is on the way to establish the national human rights institutions. Next slide. Next slide is about ratification, I guess. Yeah. ratification of human rights instruments. So you can see here the most convention ratified by all 10 countries are 3. Can you guess? Can you mention what? CRC, CEDAW, and CRPD, Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities. And the countries ratified all conventions the most is Cambodia, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei only ratified the 3. So we have a different level of not compliant, but engagement or willing to be connected with the international system. But all of them are very active in UPR, Universal Periodic Review. Next. So I mentioned about the inclusion of human rights in ASEAN, despite the fact the members of ASEAN have a different modalities in constitution, in national mechanism, and also in ratification of the convention. But nevertheless, they come to a consensus to include human rights into the charter. Article 14 is the establishment of the body, but under chapter on purpose and principle, it also mentioned about human rights. So this is quite unique. So you don't have to have everyone fulfilling the commitment of human rights writtenly, or you don't need to have all countries establish national human institutions. You still can appreciate human rights into the constitution of ASEAN, which the name is ASEAN Charter. The implication of the inclusion of human rights in ASEAN Charter has created 2 institutions, which is the AICHR and ACWC, and number of instruments. So after the ASEAN Charter, number of instruments, declaration, agreement, whatever you call it, and the characteristic of a document adopted after the ASEAN Charter has to mention human rights and become the elaboration of the word human rights in the Charter. So you can see here the list. This is only some of them. It's only until 2019. Now it's already 2023, but we have so many documents now in ASEAN in relation to human rights. Having a norms not necessarily reflected into practice. So there's two different strands. Next. So we go now to the AICHR, the body that we are going to talk a little bit deeper. The ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. Well, in the charter, you will find ASEAN Human Rights Body. But the body now has a name, which is, the name is ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. It is established by Article 14 of the ASEAN Charter, work based on TOR, 14 mandates. It has 10 members from 10 member states. The purpose is mainly to promote and protect human rights, but we are also asked not to compete with the national or international system, but rather to complement. So this is similar with the features of regional human rights mechanism I mentioned earlier, to complement national and international efforts on the promotion and protection of human rights, and to uphold international human rights standards. We report to ASEAN foreign ministers annually, and we meet twice at the minimum according to our TOR, but now it has been regularized that we meet 4 times in a year. And we work based on consensus, consultation, and it is consultative and intergovernmental body. So this is the TOR. You can also find this document in ASEAN website or AICHR website, and this is our ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. Was adopted in 2012. Next. So these are the current AICHR representative. Is there anything wrong with this slide? One is missing, which is Myanmar. Yes. Since the coup, there is no representative from Myanmar, but in our meeting, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Myanmar coming to the meeting. Because if one country do not show up, we cannot have a meeting. So we have 9 commissioners plus 1 from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so far since the coup. Yeah, okay, so now we have more women than men in this batch. Next. This is the pictures. I just would like to give you a pictures of the previous representative. Very often when I present AICHR, as if I've been AICHR for forever. so I only have 2 terms. Last year, 2019 until 2021, and now 2022 until 2024. But previous representatives are mentioned here, all of them representing 10 countries. Next, please. This is the meeting. So you can imagine how we have a meeting. This is a meeting in hotel in Phnom Penh, but the meeting in ASEAN Secretariat is this with the logo. Yeah, on this one. Yeah, every time we have a meeting, we have with a group picture with handshake. So, but this is the more or less the way we have a meeting in a year. Next. AICHR has 14 mandates, but to make it easier for everyone to monitor the work of AICHR, I clamped down the 14 mandates into 6. So AICHR has mandate on standard setting, cooperation and policy support, protection, human rights strategy, research and capacity building, dialogue and engagement. If you ask me what is the role of AICHR on the right of migrant workers, so AICHR is responsible to develop a standard on the right of migrant workers, to come up with human rights cooperation and policy support to the sectoral body dealing with migrant workers, to ensure protection for migrant workers, to come up with human rights strategy, research and capacity building, dialogue and engagement. If you change the word migrant workers to other issues, similar. This is easier for civil society to monitor our work. So for instance, AICHR has done too much on this and not this one. So perhaps it would be helpful to make it more into a group of mandates. Next. AICHR has strength and weakness. The strength, AICHR as an important platform to build space on new human rights issues and norms in ASEAN. Very often, before AICHR was established, there are a number of discussions about human rights, but none of them ASEAN concern. Until AICHR said so, there is no human rights concerns, because AICHR has a responsibility to define this is the problem and this is the problem of the region. Freedom of expression and opinion may be the problem, but not necessarily a problem belong to a region. So we usually create a space to be able to discuss about it and then elaborate it further. You may ask, how you can define regional issues in AICHR? There are parameters. First, it should be cross-border. For instance, trafficking in person, migrant workers, refugees, asylum seekers. That's cross-border. Second, if it fulfills the characteristic of transboundary, it means the case or the issue may happen in one country, but the impact go beyond the one country, such as haze. Third, if it is becoming regional concerns. So for instance, the issue is not necessarily cross-border or trans-boundary, but it become common concerns of all countries. For instance, freedom of expression and opinion. Currently, not only in ASEAN, in all around the world, we governments are finding difficult how to maintain and how to strike the balance between security, human rights, and the interests of the people. So it become a regional concerns because we are all concerned about it. Another topic is not necessarily happen to all countries, but it become regional concerns such as terrorism. Laos, Vietnam felt that we don't have problem, but Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines felt that this is very, very important, and that's become regional concerns. So there are 4 characteristics in which so far ASEAN or AICHR define the regional issues. How about the issue that concern one country and wanted to be called as regional concerns? So this one country need to convince the rest 9 to make the issue become a regional issue, not a domestic issue anymore. AICHR also a platform to generate discussion based on the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. AICHR has a role to mainstream human rights. AICHR work with SOMTC, Senior Official Transnational Organized Crime, to include human rights into the work, to the efforts of counter trafficking in person, to include human rights in the work related to counter violent extremism. We work with ASEAN Senior Official Meeting on Environment to include human rights into the talk of environmental issues. So that's our role in mainstreaming human rights, engaging with internal sectoral bodies in ASEAN. And also we voice and define the regional issues I mentioned earlier, and set the regional politic of human rights. And this is very important, and it's always changed from time to time according to the chair, according to the countries, according to the representative in AICHR. AICHR become the nerve center of ASEAN when it comes to human rights. So whenever I go, people got very nervous because I carry the human rights role. So very often I found people are quite nervous, even though I don't start the conversation. But this is something that we experience so far, which is okay. Weakness of AICHR, the TOR does not mention about the power to be able for AICHR to investigate, the power to do a fact-finding mission, to receive and respond complaint, to do a country visit, to monitor human rights. It's also lack of independence of the representative. The question is now, given the limitation of AICHR, how have the body addressing the challenges of human rights in the region? We have been seeing in our eyes so many human rights issues in the region. Next, please. So progress to date, AICHR is now 13 years old. Now we have a communication or complaint mechanism. Very limited, but we have a complaint mechanism based on our agreement in November 2019. So the procedure is like this. Step 1, all communication, all complaint need to be sent to ASEAN Secretariat. ASEAN Secretariat will send the acknowledgement. Step 2, communication and letters and complaint will be tabled in AICHR meeting. AICHR will discuss it, and AICHR representative can respond it individually. And then step 3, AICHR decide to respond and then to communicate with the complainer. This is not an ideal mechanism. The ideal mechanism is that the complaint sent to ASEAN Secretariat table it to AICHR. AICHR as a regional organization respond to the case by whatever they want. For instance, interviewing, fact-finding, mediating, so many things that should be done together. But at the moment, some countries are not comfortable dealing with the cases by themselves. So those who are comfortable can take some efforts. Indonesia, for instance, we do not want to limit by those who are not comfortable dealing with human rights issues. For Indonesia, it is our responsibility to respond when our citizens send their grievances. Yeah, so that's what we have agreed. So this is not violating the non-interference, not violating the consensus, but the consensus of addressing it individually rather than together. So that's the consensus, the agreement among us. But it is very important that my readiness should not be limited by those who are not ready. Yeah, so this is very important to make the differentiation of positions. And we discuss human rights in our own ways. When I joined AICHR in 2019, whenever I talk about Rohingya, I always blocked. And the implication of the blocking of the from member states make no consensus. It means no discussion on human rights in AICHR meeting. And that's happened like very often. I also succeeded to table the discussion with consensus, but very limited. But now we have specific agenda in which we can talk about human rights. We call it the agenda on recent development in ASEAN. So we have started from April 2021 until now. We have that and institutionalized in our meeting. We have 4 meetings in a year. We raise the issue of human rights in 4 years, in 4 times in a year. So very often I use that agenda to highlight my concerns in relation to human rights situation in Myanmar after the coup. I also express the concern about the closing border where Myanmar refugees can cross Thailand. I also make a lot of concerns about other countries, including my own country, to make it fair. And no one can accuse me of violating the non-interference principle. Different with the time that I just joined AICHR in 2019. Whenever I talk about human rights issues and would like to table on human rights concerns, I always be blocked by argument that I was violating the non-interference principle. But now, since April 2021 until now, we have specific agenda in our meeting in which I can talk about human rights issues. Similarly, all countries can talk about human rights. Countries concerned can respond back to me, and I can respond too, because it's a dialogue. So very often, because my concern was about Myanmar, the representative from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Myanmar respond me back explaining blah, 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 blah. So it become a conversation. It doesn't necessarily that I have to accept the response, but it is on the table now. Now we also have an ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue. We organize it every year. So the difference between the recent agenda in the meeting of AICHR and ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue, in ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue, the one who brief and question human rights issues coming from the ASEAN member states. Sometimes from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, sometimes from the Ministry of Law and Justice, sometimes from the Ministry of Home Affairs, depending on the country, which ministries they want to send to the ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue. We follow the format of mini UPR. We do not have Troika as like a UPR process because we only 10 countries, so we don't need to have a Troika. But this is a space in which we talk about it. I actually quite happy with the way ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue has developed. We can discuss issues that we do not talk about before, like death penalty, LGBT, where's Aung San Suu Kyi, trafficking scammer in Cambodia, refugee issues. These are something that we do not talk about before among us and with member states. Now we create a space in which the discussion can be done. So how, maybe you can ask me, how you can arrive at this point, if you observe the process in the UN, whenever UN come up with a new mechanism, they will go to UN resolution. In the UN resolution, it include first, commitment of the states. Second, the modalities agreed by all member states. Third, the space to talk about it. And this is something that, this formula that been copied in AICHR, and it works quite well. Commitment of the states, modalities of the states to talk about it, and a space to talk about it. So the formula that presented at the UN also work in ASEAN. Of course, to arrive at this point require series of discussion and to answer, to respond some misunderstanding, lack of information, and so on and so forth, until we agree by consensus on these 3 points. And that's how we come up with the agenda item on recent development in AICHR meeting, which we can talk about human rights issues without being accused of violating the non-interference principle, and ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue. So the non-interference principle as a norm in ASEAN still intact, but it is the role of AICHR representative to be able to find ways within limitation. Again, the message is clear. We are working under a lot of limitation, but we cannot accept that limitation limit us. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier in the communication system, in the agenda item, as well as ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue. Yes, we have a limitation as a region. None of the regional organizations in the world have no limitation. All of them have limitation. But it is our role to find ways how not to make limitation limit us. So non-interference continue to be intact with ASEAN as a regional norms, but we have to work around it. Okay, so another entry point in which AICHR can develop is through 5-year work plan. In AICHR, in the 5-year work plan, we have included number of things like remedies, and also grievances mechanism. Complaint mechanism is grievance mechanism, referral system, human rights index. The human rights index initially, I remember when drafting the TOR, member states disagree with the word monitoring. So anticipating that debate, so we changed into human rights index, and it is adopted. So it is very important to equip ourselves with number of vocabularies when you are when certain words cannot be accepted, then you can replace with other words which reflect the same function. And country learning visit. I'm happy to inform you that last week AICHR had a visit on human rights to Bogor, to look at civil political rights, and also looking at economic, social, cultural rights, and how city government contribute to the fulfillment of human rights in Bogor. So we went, we talked to victims, and also discussed the issue of the establishment of worship place, the church of Yasmin, and the other one is to talk about fulfillment of right to food, right to clean water and sanitation, right to livelihood. So it was the first time for AICHR to ask question to their national on human rights issues, and we would like to make it as a normal practice of questioning questioning others on human rights. Next. So this answers the earlier question, yeah? And then grievance mechanism, so far I mentioned already, from 2019 until now we have 38 complaints mechanism already. 3 cases related to Indonesia. The way I responded to the cases, first, I checked to the National Human Rights Mechanism whether the cases are under their radar. If yes, then I have to wait, or I can also send to the government relevant to that case, that I received the case and I'm monitoring it, that possible. But the two cases I received, first on human rights defenders, harassment against human rights defenders, working on anti-corruption, and I talked to Komnas HAM, the National Human Rights Commissions in Jakarta, and basically the case already received a court decision. So the Komnas HAM monitor the progress, the implementation of that decision. So I do not find that AICHR need to involve into the process. Second is on criminalization of LGBT in Bogor, Bogor City. I talked to Komnas HAM. Komnas HAM has summoned the mayor, and they agree to disagree, and Komnas HAM will challenge that local law to Mahkamah Agung, Attorney General, ya? Supreme Court, to Supreme Court. And I talked to mayor already, and mayor told me the behind the stories, and there's something that he would like to do, which I support, for that local law not to be implemented. And I also know some NGOs some NGOs are preparing something not to challenge it in Supreme Court, but removing one word in the law, because that law, why problematic? The law is actually about prohibition of sexual deviant, and the groups, LGBT is mentioned in the list of the group. So like, for instance, having sex with animals, having sex with crops, so these are included as sexual deviant. So what this group is trying to do is to remove LGBT out from the law, and that's it, because that's the only place LGBT mentioned. And then so I see a number of efforts from local government, from the mayor himself, from NGOs. So I talked to the mayor that I'm monitoring the case, and please don't be surprised if I send you a letter, the letter when I see something worrying, so I can send him a letter. So that's about the connection, the response from AICHR Indonesia to some cases addressed to Indonesia. Oh, I said earlier that Indonesia received 3 cases. The last cases was about Papua, but it was about a report, research report, and not a complaint. So my response to that research is acknowledgement that I have received the report. Next. This is ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. So since you talk about norms, so to what extent ASEAN Human Rights Declaration has been used or as a framework of cooperation. ASEAN Human Rights Declaration become a corpus of knowledge where we can elaborate further on human rights. We can come up with a research, we can come up with a general comment, we can develop into more framework. For instance, now this year AICHR will be developing the ASEAN framework on environmental rights, and that initiative coming or based on the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration Article 27F, if not mistaken. There is a right to environment. Generate human rights debates, establish cross-pillar cooperation and collaboration on women. Women rights should not be only responsibility of the ASEAN Commission on Women and Children, but also our responsibility, because Article 4 in ASEAN Human Rights Declaration mentioned that right of women are human rights. So using a base as using ASEAN Human Rights Declaration as a base, we can work with different communities under ASEAN. It's also monitor of human rights in the region, but so far it has been done individually. Like myself, our team monitor human rights during COVID-19 in the region. using ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. And this also, ASEAN Human Rights Declaration has been used to develop further specific norms. I mentioned earlier about environmental rights, and the other one is on person with disabilities. And platform for sharing practices and engagement. At the moment, for instance, if I want to talk to police or military, what justification I should give them? ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, because it belongs to all ASEAN member states. So it become our entry point to engage with other bodies as well. Next. Yeah, next. This is also the use of ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. I mentioned already about the agenda in recent development. Next. This is ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue. I don't have to explain. This is already, this is the modalities on ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue, closed meeting, 4 elements, order of proceeding, agreed by member state. It is very important to ensure agreement of all member states. I never organize something in surprise. So I want ASEAN member state come to the meeting, come to the event with everything known, everything agreed, everything communicated. So it is, so they come to the meeting confidently because they have been heard, and there is no surprises, there is no, because they represented member states, so they need to have a approval to be able to come to that point. Next. With the ASEAN national human institutions, with national human institutions in Southeast Asia, we have established an annual meeting as well. In the last 12 years, AICHR refused to meet with the national human institutions by the reason that not all ASEAN member states have national human institutions. But in 2019, we come up with the agreement. By 2020, we have the first engagement with national human institutions. And we have also joint activity with SANAF. This year, our joint activity will be related to the prevention of torture. Next. This is the ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue I mentioned earlier. In 2021 was organized online. And this is the meeting between, this is the annual meeting between ASEAN member states, ASEAN foreign ministers and AICHR. So we interface meeting. And usually AICHR representatives talk about the development, also talk about issues. In this particular event, we talk about our concerns on the killing of 4 activists in Myanmar. And also the foreign ministers also share the similar concerns on the killing of 4 activists. Next. These are some of the efforts from individual member states, individual AICHR representative. I often come up with the statement. Some of the statement I made and I read during the AICHR meeting been circulated through Facebook of AICHR Indonesia or Instagram or Twitter to make it public. And this is our joint statement, 5 of us addressing the killing of 4 activists. Next. So this is the visit we just had in Bogor. In this discussion, we talk about freedom of religion belief, digging more, understanding more about the problem of Church Yasmin in Bogor and the problem of establishing the church. Over here, this is AICHR representative. This is the assistant. This is from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, play a neutral role. This is victims, the priests, local governments, NGO. So we face to face. And this is in one of the village when we talk about the farmers, women leaders, religious leaders there about how to fulfill, how the city government help the people, farmers, to fulfill the right to food. Next. So this is my last slide to allow you to ask question later. So this is from Matthew Davis from ANU. In one of his article in 2017, of course this is no longer reflected what happened in AICHR, but the way he perceived the role of AICHR so far is as educator, enabler, standard setter, catalyst. But this is his observation until 2017. Maybe now, in already 2023, he might come up with a different analysis about viewing the role of AICHR in human rights. Thank you very much. I have still slides, but let's stop here first if you have questions. Online can also online.
Thank you so much, and it's really nice to know that at least in Asia Pacific, ASEAN has a separate body for human rights where no other organization has. So I actually have 3 questions. Sorry, I'm Nazia. I'm from Bangladesh, and I'm an APMA student. So my first question is like, when a member state is violating human rights situation, especially if I can like give the example of Myanmar, like it's been happening for so many years already. So what AICHR actually can do, because in the TOR mentioned that not interfering into political matter and everything else. So this kind of human rights violation is somehow connected with the political situation there. So what can AICHR do other than just mentioning them that this is happening? What pressure they can create? And the second one is that when we are looking at the UN human rights instruments, and many countries have not signed many. So does AICHR have any kind of discussion on this, that why this country is not signing or ratifying this? Like the basic ones, even the AICHR, few countries haven't signed them. So like, unless they're signing it, it is difficult to put pressure on them to ensure the rights. So does AICHR ever have a discussion on this, like why are you not signing, or you should sign? And the third one is that you're talking about the LGBTQI rights. So I want to know the response of Brunei, because Brunei is quite strict about things like that because of it's a Muslim country and they follow the Sharia law very strictly. So what was their response in terms of making sure of the LGBTQI rights? Yeah, these 3 are my question. Thank you.
It will be better for you to respond, and we collect another answer.
Thank you very much, Nazia. So on the situation of Myanmar, what AICHR has done or what AICHR can do, similar with the UN. We highlight the issue in different occasions, inside or outside of ASEAN forum. If you think that AICHR can enter Myanmar and then punish the general, that is not the role. So what we can do is to peer pressure and come up with, individual representative come up with their own reports. The UN just come up with the reports yesterday, I think, addressing economic, social, cultural rights as well as civil political rights. In my case, I receive a lot of reports from NGOs in Myanmar and outside of Myanmar. And I use the recent development agenda to convey the messages to the meeting and also to Myanmar. Basically to tell Myanmar that we are not happy with what you have done to your people. And in the case, in international relation, that's already very hurtful when other countries commenting your situation. Very often in AICHR, I do not use language that too diplomatic but I'm not also using harsh language because that is not proper. But it's more, it is as it is. If it is rape, and it is rape. If it is killing, it is killing. It is. I do not use other term because that's already have a legal definition in the UN convention. So I follow the language used by the UN as well as by ASEAN. But that's what AICHR can do. 5-point consensus has two approaches, which is not human rights. Two approaches are political approach and humanitarian approach. The implication of not having human rights approach in the 5-point consensus means human rights tools, human rights bodies are not included in the process of discussion. But I understand in April 2021, one of the reasons why human rights was not included, because if it was included, there will be no 5-point consensus at all in that time. But at the same, well, also, I'm very focal to my own government as well in my capacity as civil society or now, but now I just have more space. Before I speak critically outside of the system, I'm now speaking critically inside the system. Given my access, so I comment this and expressing my disagreement, even though I understand, but the implication of any conflict or crisis are human rights. And very often I feeding number of issues to my counterpart in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And so I think they are understanding that this political crisis has created human rights violation beyond perhaps that Madhav imagined earlier. And it has been my understanding the foreign ministers of ASEAN have been expressing their concerns in the ASEAN meeting or outside of the meeting. You can hear foreign minister of Singapore, of Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, very critical about human rights violation as the implication of the coup. So that's what AICHR can do, but it is not stopped. We continue to put pressure to Myanmar. UN instrument, can AICHR encourage? AICHR does not tell countries to ratify the convention. In fact, we host a number of discussion among member states on ratification and the experience of ratification, and to discuss about difficulties in compliance with certain conventions. For instance, ASEAN Human Rights Dialogue is one of them, and we also have a series activities, for instance, in the discussion in relation to prevention of torture. We talk about the challenges and compliance after ratification of the CAT for member states. So, but those who are not ratifying the convention also included in the discussion. So rather than telling them what to do, we provide a space to make them feel comfortable to talk about torture or prevention of torture. So this is only the example of many. So the way in one of the mandate of AICHR is to promote the ratification of international convention related to human rights. So it is in our mandate. But the way we do it, the way we promote it, not telling them, hey, you ratify. So we don't do that. Yeah, that's intervention, and it is not nice. So we bring them into dialogue, we bring them into discussion, but it is very clear for member states. They are actually persuaded to ratify convention, but we just do not mention it. On LGBT, in AICHR, we do not ask individual country. When we discuss, those who are comfortable to talk about it, they can talk about it. If they are not comfortable, so they don't talk. So far, Brunei never talk about LGBT. Other countries like Singapore updated us about the 366A that has been removed from the constitution and some development. So AICHR is a platform in which member states can share their progresses, the challenges about human rights according to their own language, their own ways. We do not want to impose anything. And it is already, for me, because I'm studying ASEAN like from the beginning, this is already improvement that member states are willing to talk about human rights. Before, they don't want to talk about human rights, not even want to share with others. But now, gradually, they talk about it, but we never impose, or we call, Brunei, can you talk about this? No, that is not possible. That is not allowed. That is improper in international relation practice.
Okay, Bayun, my name is Bayu Dardias. My question is about the institutional relationship at the supranational and subnational level. So, as I understand that ASEAN is a government body at the ASEAN level, and at the ministerial level, we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Human Rights. And also we have what we call it as state auxiliary agencies. So we have a Human Rights Commission, we have a women human right, and also children. So my question is that when you, the AICHR, and your representative of Indonesia there, so what are you representing? Are you representing based on, are you as part, or are you reporting to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Ministry of Legal and Human Rights, or to the other state auxiliary agencies as well? And that's going up. If there is a problem and something to discuss at the national level, who you deal with? Can you deal with all of those ministers and also with other state auxiliary agencies? And you also mentioning about in Bogor that you have a relation with the subnational level. So what is actually the institutional relation between this AICHR with those subnational government in Indonesia? And I think this case of Indonesia might be reflected to other countries as well. So because they have a lot of government bodies and, you know, quote, semi-government bodies that also work on human rights. So that's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. ASEAN is not supranational. It is intergovernmental regionalism. Supranational is like EU. In Europe, there are two, one intergovernmental regionalism and the other one is supranational. COE is the intergovernmental regionalism. So they adopted two types, but in ASEAN, it's only one type. So first, let's look at the charter. Article 14 mentioned about the establishment of human rights body by the ASEAN foreign ministers, and then the second paragraph mentioned about the body will report to the ASEAN foreign ministers. So that's set the tone that our link in the national government is foreign minister. So I receive a mandates from the foreign minister. How I engage, so I representing the states, mean government, the people, the values, the principle. But in terms of administration, logistic, I've been supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was given an office in the National Secretariat of ASEAN, which is the under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Caracaloca because Ministry of Foreign Affairs has two buildings, Pusdiklat in Sisingamangaraja and the other one in Penjambon. I'm in Sisingamangaraja. So the line of command, or not line command, line of cooperation is with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. My relations with the Ministry of Law and Human Rights is more partners. With the National Human Rights Commission led Komnas HAM, as well as with the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. If there is an initiative, for instance, before I develop a concept notes or design an activity, I consult them first. I consult Ministry of Law and Human Rights, Ministry of Women Empowerment, as well as civil society dealing with the issue, because I need to hear all the voices. I cannot assume that I know everything, yeah, because my interest may be different from the victim's interest and from the people, from the government's interest. So after listening all, then I will be able to reflect that into a concept note in which how to bring victims' interests, government interest, as well as the regional interest in ASEAN, because it has to be regional. I mentioned 4 characteristics of regional concerns, yeah, earlier. So my relationship with others are more partnership, coordination. With Komnas HAM, now gradually because of complaint mechanism, we have another channel to consult with them on cases for not to overlap in dealing with the case. With Bogor, we follow the international protocol that invitation to UN or invitation to special rapporteur has to be based from or has to be sent from member states. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, well, actually, Bogor, City of Bogor, talked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent the letter invitation to AICHR, and then because I'm the chair, I was the one who dealing with it, and then based on the invitation, we went to Bogor. So we still within the protocol and how do and don'ts. How this relation work at the national and regional or international system. If you ask me, is there any differences on position between the government of Indonesia and myself as a person, as human rights activist? Of course there are. I against death penalty. I support the fulfillment of human rights, including indigenous people, LGBT. For me, all human rights. I don't have any political definition behind such and such definition, yeah. But states may have a different opinion. But so far, I don't have any problem because not only Indonesia has a position that is on LGBT. Some countries also. So it's already mount the non-consensus. So far it's fine. So we can, but it doesn't mean that it is not important. Very often we inserted the issue of LGBT in number of discussion. So for instance, on trafficking in person, task forces at the national level, task forces dealing with trafficking in person, they deal with transgender LGBT as victims. So how, and the role of government is to ensure that victims' right to fulfill. So that is why it is very important that the status and identity of the victim should not prevent them to receive services. So that area we talk about LGBT, whether LGBT victims or victims that are LGBT have a different needs, have a different situation that the frontliners should be sensitive on. So instead of discussing about LGBT, we insert the issue of LGBT in different topic, like right to remedy, like I mentioned about trafficking person, and talk about on gender, for instance, gender issue. So that's many ways that we can do. Of course, our friends from LGBT are not happy with this, but this is something that we can do at the moment. This is not something written on the stone. It's a process. It is very important to appreciate the small steps from time to time, and perhaps at some point there is no. It's normalized to talk about different identities, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Ken from Myanmar. I have a question about you already mentioned about the principle of non-interference policy in ASEAN. So my question is, what is the relationship between the country, the ASEAN level discussion? Every year or every 6 months, there's ASEAN leader meeting, minister meeting or something like that. The discussion ongoing, and I do believe that there is on Myanmar case, there is 5 consensus from ASEAN to Myanmar junta to implement it. So, and AICHR also doing peer pressure to Myanmar government. So I am just curious, what is the relationship between, for example, you are currently chair as a AICHR, and how these ongoing discussion through the leader discussion, feed into the leader discussion as the diplomatic way of pressure.
First of all, there is no government of Myanmar at the moment. We never call it government of Myanmar. We call it SEC. Yeah. In ASEAN official document, it mentioned about government of Myanmar with the footnote that it is not referring to the current regime. So it's very important that ASEAN make that position. On media, ASEAN has been seen as providing legitimacy and so on, but if you look at the text, it doesn't show like that. And also in the joint communique, it mentioned before Myanmar was prohibited to come, it was mentioned the foreign minister of ASEAN and SEC appointed something. Law. So I think ASEAN is very clear about not recognizing Myanmar regime. There is no government in Myanmar right now. So relationship between AICHR discussion with the ASEAN summit, it depends on the chair very often. Sometimes disconnected, sometimes connected. After the coup, February 2021, AICHR discussion initially wanted to avoid this kind of discussion, but I pushed for AICHR to connect with the dynamic at the summit level. That is why we come up with the agenda item on recent development in ASEAN. To provide a space to do peer pressure and to connect. So very often some of us use this to connect with the discussion. We make a reference to the statement, joint communique or chairman statement and so on and so forth to be able to connect. Similarly with 5-point consensus, we continue to highlight our disappointment of lack of implementation from the side of Tatmadaw at the moment, or SEC. Yeah, so that's a lot of peer pressures, but in summit and ASEAN foreign ministers, the chairs for Myanmar has been always empty from September 2021 until now. So it is not there. Some senior official meetings still include Myanmar, but maybe this is a dimension because many civil society inside Myanmar thinks that all officials that are still working in the current position are Tatmadaw followers. In our engagement, it is not like that. Many diplomats that we know were house arrest. Some diplomats that stay or some government official that stay in the current departments not because they follow, but for so many reasons. Maybe they need money, their families are sick and need money, and they are under threats. So many dimensions. So I think it is unfair for civil servants that do not join CDM immediately labeled as SEC followers. I don't think it is black and white because someone after the coup, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Myanmar come to our meeting. She felt very, upset, but at one time she has to defend the country, but at the same time she felt so sad about the country. This is what Indonesian diplomats experienced during Suharto. So we can, well, I'm not diplomat in that time, but I can relate to the situation, how difficult it was for them to stay in the place now, because it just, they are right person in the wrong place right now. So that is why we continue to pressure, but at a personal level, we try to be like common human interaction, quite nice, we talk, but still, when it comes to the meeting, we are all using our hat as representing of the states. We pressure them, but coffee break, we can talk something else about the children, about the dogs, about our pets, about many things. But yes, pressure continue to be there, and AICHR, I think I felt that some of the reps already feeling tired of pressuring. But I think we need to just maintain this to show SEC that we are unhappy with the situation, and also with very disappointed with the way SEC deals with 5-point consensus. Indonesia as a chair should come up with a plan of action and operational plan of 5-point consensus. But we haven't seen the document yet, so we do not know.
Hello. Good morning, Madam. Thank you very much for your presentation. I am Kay, an APMA student from the Philippines, and I have two questions. The first question is on the non-interference principle. This has been one of the major criticisms against the ASEAN. So I'm curious if there are any parameters as to when or what issues or matters the member states can invoke the non-interference principle, or is it like blanket non-interference? They can just say it when they want it. And my second question is on specifically on human rights education. Are there any initiatives or attempts for the ASEAN, or to be specific, the AICHR, to integrate human rights education in school curriculums in ASEAN? Because as a Filipino, for example, I have not learned a lot about the ASEAN when compared to people from Indonesia or Laos, where ASEAN is more integrated in the curriculum. And then, of course, more specifically, human rights education. Thank you.
That's a very good question. I think that's the way we have to ask question about non-interference, yeah. Because very often, as you can read in the many journals, academic journals, everything which doesn't work in ASEAN, blame to non-interference principle. So that's too blanket accusation about the non-interference principle. But for ASEAN, non-interference principle is sacrosanct norms. It cannot be negotiated. Now the question is, what is the parameter? How and when it can be used? That's something that failed to arrive at consensus when the charter was adopted. But now charter is supposed to be reviewed, and Indonesia already proposed strengthening institutionalization strengthening the institution of ASEAN, which one of them to open the box that many member states do not want to open. The non-interference principle, yes, it is a norm, but how, when, where, to what issue need to be invoked. The statement of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia in April 2021, or maybe March, after the shuttle diplomacy, one of the statement mentioning about non-interference principle is the norm of ASEAN, but when it comes to human rights, so it already proposed the definition. So I think in Africa, there is non-intervention. Initially, there was non-intervention, but when the case of genocide, war crime, crime against humanity, ethnic cleansing, then it should not be invoked. So they have parameter. I know that discussion was in the process of developing the charter before, but did not or failed to get consensus. But now perhaps it is time to open the discussion again, how to maintain non-interference principle, but at the same time able to address some of the big issues that concern everyone. It's like this genocide and so on and so forth. So that's the parameter is not there. So you can, as you can see, member state invoking anytime, anywhere they want to say, I do not want to do anything. I do not want to be bothered on the issue. On human rights education, so this is perhaps different. When I was a child, when I was still elementary school, I study ASEAN. I'm not sure about why it is not there anymore, but I do not know the discussion on this, but so far AICHR has engaged with AUN, the ASEAN University Network, on how to include human rights into the high education, not yet below. So initially it was master level and then bachelor level, but not below. There has been number of interest to put human rights as part of the curriculum of the high school, but I'm not sure to what extent, because we rarely discuss about this at the moment. We still discussing how education can be universal rights for everyone, regardless their status, whether they are Ahmadi or whether they belong to a religious minority or others, or other minorities they have, or refugees. Refugees now in children refugees do not have right to education in many part of the countries in Southeast Asia. So we are still in that area at the moment, yeah, because it's basic rights, how to ensure basic rights. But I think this is very, very important point to include human rights and ASEAN in the school curriculum.
Hello, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Demas. I'm currently still an undergraduate student in International Relations at Universitas Gadjah Mada. So I think because everyone has been pretty much very into AICR, I think I would like to know an experience comparatively to know about the system, because every questions that I have already been answered. For example, is there self-censorship for countries inside of the AICR? And I think that's already been answered. And how do you feel as human rights activists to be part of the system? But I think this is what's make me interested, as I probably is also interesting to work on human rights. How do you position yourself as a human rights activist, especially working outside the government before and then entering now in the government? Do you feel like you are being accommodated, and you are, is there right now is the limitation itself is not defining you anymore, or is there anything that's supposed to be easy to access but there are no access in the systems? And do you think that working in the government is fulfilling, as well as it's becoming easier to be able to have our ideal to come true? Do you recommend this job for people who have passion in human rights? I think that's basically my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is now personal question. Well, we can always do the advocacy on human rights in different levels, and all levels require our supports. But because we have limitation, perhaps we might want to consider to focus on certain level. I've been working on human rights more on advocacy level. One thing, because I'm not as strong as many human rights activists, can hear the story from the victims, engaging with them. I don't have that strength. Yeah, I can listen to them, I can, but if you find yourself not be able to do anything, that's so burden. And I was in that position before. It is not that doing advocacy, changing the policy is easier. It is not easier, but it requires you to establish your good argument, good relations, and so many skills that you have to obtain to be in doing the advocacy. And so I think knowing your strength, knowing where you feel more satisfying is very important. I'm not sure whether I'm suggesting everyone to be in this position, but at the moment, if we don't claim our space in the international or regional advocacy, government will use that space. It means the conversation, the language, the text, the policies, approaches is based on the views of the government. So our role and our existence to that space is to make the policies more equal, more diverse, more humane, and more accommodative to others. But it doesn't mean, but it is very dangerous if we always think that we are always right and we are always know everything. That is why consultation with different groups, especially victims, very, very important. And lower your ego is also very important, because I think it is in advocacy, communication is key. How to convey the messages, especially from the victims to the policymakers, that can be understood, can be adopted. So very often I do not use difficult languages or jargon or terms that I learn in school. Depending on my audience, if my audience prefer to use certain language, and I can use, because that if communication can be successful if we be able to communicate and the message can be accepted. I would like to give you the example of how I strike a balance between me as a human rights activist working in the government system right now, especially during in the coup. Yeah. So the coup happened on the 1st February 2021. I did not ask permission to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I just tabled my questions to the AICHR, the implication of that, the screen, because we meet online, so the screen immediately off. And everyone was so upset. Malaysia representative told me so many things, so we are upset. Then I talked to my counterpart in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, how come Indonesia is treated this way? And then from the ministry said, what do you want? Do you want us to send them a letter? And then, no, don't. This is only February. This is still early in the chairship of that country. So let's use this as an advocacy tool. Don't take it personally. That's also very important. Don't take it personally. So you will be bullied. You will be. I have been bullied because I'm woman. I'm civil society. I'm not government. I'm not diplomat. But I don't take it personally. That's their problem, not my problem. My country selected and appointed me represent the state. So that's the only concern I have. If you have problem with this, that's your problem. I don't have a problem with that. And so like it or not, accept me as the representative of Indonesia. And so in that time, we keep the reaction from the chair in that time. And then one day I saw our military head was heading the ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meeting. And all of the members there wearing uniform, military uniforms. And I was so shocked because, oh my God, I'm not going to be in the AICHR meeting with these uniform people. But of course they are military, yeah? They are military, but because the coup in Myanmar, the military took over by force the power. So I cannot imagine to be in the picture, group picture, with someone from Myanmar representing AICHR with military uniform. Immediately I cannot sleep, and then I talked to my counterpart in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I said, but I cannot go beyond this. If someone from Myanmar representing the country with military, that's a big no. I'm a human rights activist. I cannot. And then, so we come to some agreement, some plan. First, if the person coming with the military uniform, I will boycott. Agreed. If the one coming from Myanmar will be a military but without military uniform, would you still attend the AICHR meeting? No, no at all. Okay, agreed. Third option, if the one coming from Myanmar is coming from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, civilian, okay, that's okay, because they are, like I said earlier, they are diplomats actually. Then we agree on many things. First, that's already representation, and then they also said, first, Indonesia need to table the agenda of talking about human rights in Myanmar in AICHR meeting. If it is not fulfilled, I will boycott. Agreed. So we make a lot of deals with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then I said, if Indonesian representative does not come to the meeting, Ministry of Foreign Affairs cannot replace me. Because according to our TOR, if the representative cannot come, the state should replace the person temporarily. And that it was agreed. The implication of not having one country present in the meeting was that the meeting will not happen. Yeah, so no consensus. And then for the April meeting, we get the approval consensus to have one agenda, but it's agenda 15. So the boycott plan not implemented because it satisfied the purpose. And then in June meeting, we only have 3 days meeting, and then day 1 we cannot come up with the agreement on agenda because I want this agenda meeting on discussing human rights issues to be included in the agenda. We did not come to consensus for 2 days, no meeting for 2 days. And then I said, in that time I said, there is no point of me attending this meeting without ability to speak about human rights issues in the region. I am Human Rights Commissioner. If no consensus on this agenda item, myself and my team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will screen off. And immediately everyone was so nervous about that, and they're shocked, and I'm serious about it. And then I said to them, just decide, are we going to have the agenda or not? If not, I'm ready to screen off. There's no point for me. And then we did not get consensus day 1, day 2 with that not consensus, and the evening we talk, or the chair was Brunei, Indonesia, and Myanmar, but Myanmar canceled the trilateral online meeting last minute. On the 3rd day, finally we can arrive at a consensus that we can talk about it, not adding additional agenda, but using the existing agenda, which is even better because I proposed agenda 15, but it became agenda 4. So before everything, we talk about human rights issues. Because initially in agenda 15, we talk about everything and talk about human rights later, human rights issues. So this is even better. So from that on until now, we still have that agenda. So that's how I try to strike balance between me as a human rights activist and in my role in the government. I was happy because I do not compromise, and I was true to myself that I cannot accept. For your information, I'm a daughter of military person. I was born in military compound, I grew up in military, but it doesn't mean that I always on the side of military, because it is not necessarily military. The person wearing the uniform actually committing or using the military role for their own purposes. So I was happy that that I insisted and I expressed my my feeling, my position to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'm also lucky that the people in the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs understood very well my position. They know the implication of appointing me or selecting me as the representative of AICHR, because my background is civil society, my background is human rights. I am educated on human rights. I cannot compromise certain principles. And yeah, so I think that set the tone on how we can carry this. I'm not the threat to government of Indonesia, but we have a common concerns on human rights in the region. I also told them, if I need to criticize Indonesia in AICHR meeting, I will do that because I'm a commissioner. I should be seen as independent. If almost all my decisions were not intervened by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I shared, yes, but the final say is still with me. They can give me some advices, but the decision is with me. So they always said, this is a situation, yeah, Ibu Yuyun, but it is up to you because you are the AICHR representative. So I'm lucky that I've given this kind of space and independency from the government.
I see that the resolutions on human rights problems isn't good in not even talking about other ASEAN countries, but even in Indonesia. So in East Timor it was largely good because it is a transnational issue. But in other domestic cases like in Aceh or in Papua, the government set up an ad hoc court, but the result is so it's expected, right? So do you see that by streamlining the human rights regulations into each ASEAN countries regulation will enhance the human rights conditions? Thank you.
So the answer is, yeah, possible. But the time is maybe not now. So now, for instance, AICHR is not responsible to establish ASEAN Human Rights Court because it's commission and the court is a court. So we are like semi-legislative, yeah? Because we have different roles and should not. AICHR should not on the top of the court. The court is there too. And there was also a discussion whether we have a court while we have a different legal regime, all 10 countries. We are still having the legacy of the colonizers. Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, almost the same. Philippines, Indonesia, very different. Thailand was not colonized by, but the laws influenced by the French, British, and one more country. So, is it possible to have a court within this kind of different legal regime? If you look at the African court, it is possible. But the African court come up with first, I think, protocol. So there is an ASEAN Charter on Human and People's Rights. So it is very high. The establishment of African Union is Constitutional Act. And then there is a ASEAN Charter on Human and People's Rights. And there is a protocol to ASEAN African Charter on Human and People's Rights to establish court. So the court and commission attached to this ASEAN Charter. But the but the protocol require ratification. So it means now the Court of African Commission on Human and People's Rights established, but only applicable for certain countries that ratify that protocol. So that's a way to deal with different legal regime of the member states. Possible. The problem is whether political willing to do that. So I think, but this discussion need to be continued to be there because we know not only in ASEAN, everywhere in the world, if you don't know on the issue, we tend to disagree. Especially if we represent our country, if you don't know the issue, we don't know the implication, we better not to, because we're responsible to the population in our country, we're responsible for the country. So that is why more discussion on this, more elaboration of, because now I think talking about Human Rights Commission is already scary enough, more to talk about human rights courts. But always possible. We just to maintain and condition the situation to explore possibilities. Do not think about realizing quickly, but I always believe whatever we introduce, we work this time will contribute to the future. And that's what I also learned, yeah, because Indonesia, we can have a benefit, advantages of being in democratization now because of all of our brothers, sisters already fought for it, for a reform. So that is why whatever they have done in the past contribute to the situation now. In AICHR, whatever many people had done at advocacy in the past, we can carry forward the result. So I always believe also, very often what we have done in AICHR not necessarily impacted people on the ground, but we have to continue doing it. But because the implication and the result may not be felt now, but rather felt later. So for the next representative not to start from zero, they can continue the work. So with the court, in long term, perhaps possible. ASEAN also doesn't have parliament, ASEAN parliament, unlike in the EU, because they disagree having the ASEAN parliamentarians with the process of selecting the parliament members directly and so on and so forth. But that's the discussion 15 years ago. Maybe if we table again, then those who are not consensus in the past may find consensus now or later.
Thank you so much. Perhaps you want to? Oh. Okay, sure.
So I intentionally not to show all the slides because we need to discuss, but perhaps I can just go through without making some explanation in detail. Can we go to the slides? And it is in PDF because it's very heavy if I send it as a PowerPoint presentation. We were in next. We were in here. So next is this is the website where all activities will be posted here. Also videos. So if you want to know what happened in AICHR meeting or in ASEAN Dialogue or any activities, you can watch the 3 minutes video. And then next. This is what we are going to do, a legal instrument on human rights, referral system, human rights index, country visit already done this month. Next. This is some of our homework. We continue to evolve, yeah, from time to time. Next. This is ASEAN Declaration, and this is about Myanmar. Next. Next. So this is the chronological order of how ASEAN and AICHR responded to the issue of Myanmar from February 21. And then next, this is 2022. The purple fonts, these are the AICHR. The rest are ASEAN. And then 2023, next. So we haven't put a lot because we just start the year, but so this is going to be fulfilled and populated in relation to chronological order of the response to the issue of Myanmar. Next. So this is the report of the AICHR that's out yesterday in terms of people who were killed and so on and so forth. I just put it here as a picture. Next. And this is violence, conflict, and protection civilian. Again, this is from AICHR, no? Not AICHR. Just to give you that the sphere of the issue in Myanmar. And next, airstrike and artillery selling. Next, burning as. So this is about all Myanmar. You can look at it later. Yeah. Next. Yes. They also include Rohingya in it. Next. Rule of law and civic space. Next. Economic and social rights. Next. This is the implementation of 5-point consensus by ASEAN. I also make some of the chronological order, what has been fulfilled and not. You can see number 1 and number 2, cessation of violence and dialogue is just none, 0. Next. This is AICHR response to Myanmar crisis. We issue press statement on 5th February and 31st of July. Next. This is our proposal to IMM I mentioned earlier. Next. So this is my op-ed. So I use op-ed statement publicly in the posting in social media. And then next, yeah. So we discuss on Myanmar. Okay, thank you.
With the end of this presentation, I would like to invite all of you in joining me in giving applause to Mbak Yoyon. Thank you so much, Mbak Yoyon, for sharing your not only professional assessment experience, but also personal, I think, experience with us all today. Good luck for your job in representing Indonesia at the AICHR. Thank you so much, Mbak Yoyon. And thank you for everyone who joining us the class today. So yeah, for the APMA, you will have another class, I guess, after this. So please have a rest. We have another class at 1. And thank you for others outside APMA in joining this class. Thank you. That's it, I guess. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon all. You guys would like to take a picture together? Sure, where are we going to have it? Okay, we should have in this side because the light is coming from outside. So probably it will be better for us to have it this side. Thank you.
all do.